This week, Kumar and I discuss a manga comedy classic, Rumiko Takahashi's Urusei Yatsura, also known as Lum. The history of it, the gags you miss if you don't speak Japanese, and what's weird about it from a Western perspective. But first, help keep this podcast coming out weekly. Support the show at patreon.com/deconcomics. With your pledge, you can access hours of bonus podcasts of Mulele and me reviewing Marvel Comics movies, and now also the Amazon Prime series The Boys. And you can join me to discuss the comic of your choice on the show, and more. Pledge your support now at patreon.com/deconcomics. This is Tim.
This is Kumar.
And this is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics. This is Tim in Tokyo with Kumar in Melbourne. How you doing?
I'm pretty good. I've got, unusually, my hair isn't usually this long, which nobody can see, of course, but, and we're still going to be, they've slightly lifted some restrictions, but we're still basically under lockdown, at least until October 19th.
Wow.
Today's October 8th, and we're allowed to we're allowed to have two families meet in a public place, not at home, and you can have maximum 5 people between two families. So we actually went to the park the other day with my friend and his son, and you have to have your masks on and everything, but everyone else in the park, nobody had any masks. They were just all ages, and it was really, we felt like nerds for wearing our masks. But it's not even a choice here. It's like legally mandated. But anyway. Anyway, that's that. So maybe in 2 weeks we might be somewhat back to normal. I mean, the numbers are pretty low at the moment. Mm-hmm. It's funny how we're having this conversation. I don't even need to say what we're talking about.
By this time, nobody needs any introduction to that topic.
Yeah.
How about the topic of our podcast here?
Yeah, sure.
We're going to talk about Urusei Yatsura by Rumiko Takahashi. And, of course, Takahashi's come up on this podcast a couple times before. We did Ranma way back in 2008.
Wait, I was going to ask you that, because I know we did... what was the... it was like the magical one where she goes into the past and they have to find the crystals, and there's Inuyasha. That was the... We did Inuyasha, and I was going to ask you...
Yeah, I kind of forgot we did Inuyasha.
Well, I forgot doing Ranma. I was going to ask you at the start of this, like, did we do Ranma? Because I couldn't remember if we had or hadn't.
Ranma is really clear in my mind, because I remember I had gone to the States for my brother's wedding, and I had, like, I think every volume of Ranma from the Yokota Base Library along with me on that trip, and I was reading Ranma through that trip. So that's why I remembered, without even looking it up, 2008.
Right.
But yeah, I guess we did do Inuyasha. I had forgotten that.
Yeah, and I think my memory is that you liked it more than I did at the time, but we kind of haven't been talking about her enough, because she's really a giant.
Yeah. Well, there was one episode more recently, the past couple of years, where Patrick and I talked about, like, the ghosts and goblins in Takahashi's work.
Okay.
Not really talking about a specific title, but... so she's come up a few times before. This was actually her first big success, starting way back in 1978, and running in... Shonen Sunday for 9 years until 1987. Now, I think this series, maybe more than any of the others, there's so much in it that you probably wouldn't understand if you don't speak Japanese, depending on the translation you've got. So I wanted to read it on Comixology, but it's blocked here in Japan, this title.
Okay.
So I ended up buying 3 volumes, and these are the new Viz 2-in-1 volumes.
Yeah.
that are, super thick. So it would have been, I bought 3, it would have been 6 in the previous publishing. But I saw that this is a different translation from what they had published like in the 90s. And I felt like for the non-Japanese speaker, it was kind of under-translated. I mean, maybe some of these things are hard to translate, but a lot of the names and stuff, if you wanted to start footnoting, you could footnote all over the place. There are some things that are explained in endnotes.
I think footnotes are... In a comedy, it's the worst choice.
That's true.
I actually felt the translation was pretty good. I thought it was really funny. I don't know if that's because of my background in Japanese or what. I think the ones that were really specifically cultural were more problematic. I didn't think the language is an issue. I think the cultural stuff was maybe be a bit stickier for people. But we haven't even talked about what it is yet. But basically, because it's like a sitcom, like there's one episode where they go back in time and they meet this character Yoshitsune, who's this really famous Japanese warrior, and it's kind of based like the humor in that episode is kind of based on how ridiculous they make him look, and it's almost like if it had been about King Arthur or something like that. But even I was reading it, and it was kind of falling a bit flat, and I think it was only because of that reason. I think otherwise, I think they handled the kind of puns and stuff pretty well. Were there any examples of something you felt that was sticky?
Well, things that they just sort of glossed over. Like, it didn't even occur to me as I was reading it, even though I should have known this, but these aliens are called Oni, which an Oni in Japanese is a kind of ogre. And these aliens look like Japanese ogres with the little horns and wearing clothes that look kind of like zebra skin, except they're black and yellow when they're colored. But of course, this is a black and white comic. Well, although sometimes whole chapters appeared to have been originally in color, but they're black and white in this, which is kind of annoying. Because they don't look as sharp then. They look kind of dull when it's color printed.
Yeah, they do that. That often happens in manga when they bring them over to English, because even in Japanese sometimes, because it cuts down on production costs.
Sure.
To not have an color insert.
What the thing that I should have known and missed was that so in the very first chapter, it involves the game of tag, which in Japanese is onigoko, or kind of pretending to be an ogre. Yeah. And like, of course. But when I was reading it, it didn't dawn on me.
Yeah, that didn't hit me either until you just said it. But I think the thing that's working in its favor is that it's so fast-paced that it's just kind of going from gag to gag, and stuff gets lost in translation inevitably. Almost doesn't matter. I think there were very few cases. The one sticks out in my mind is at one stage the main character Ataru, they write the kids in class, for various reasons, write him a fake love letter, and the name of the girl is Otoko, which in Japanese means man, and he's kind of too dumb to look at the name and realize it's a fake letter, and all the other evidence that it's a fake letter. But that's one of the really funny little clues that and there's no footnote about that or endnote about. I don't think. I don't remember.
I don't think there was. It looks like a girl's name because it ends in ko, which nowadays those have kind of gone out of style. But back then there were many, many girls who had first names that ended with ko. So it's kind of a nice gag that it looks like a girl's name, but it means a man.
Yeah.
Otoko-chan.
Yeah. But even the endnotes, like putting footnotes at the back, even is you don't want to flip back and forth. Again, that breaks up the pace. So I think they've I think they've done a very good job with what it is, but I would love to compare it with the 90s translation. That would be interesting.
Mm-hmm. Now, the meaning of the title it's a pun. Well, I found this explanation on IMDb connected with the anime. The name Urusei Yatsura is a pun within a pun. In normal Japanese, the name would be spelled Urusei Yatsura, meaning obnoxious people. However, the title is spelled with the Japanese kanji character for star, hoshi, or sei, making it Urusei Yatsura, which could be interpreted as jerks from planet Uru, those annoying bastards from the planet Uru, or as Anamego had it for a while, those obnoxious aliens.
Right.
And yeah, I guess initially this was only going to be a 5-chapter series, and in each chapter, Ataru was going to meet different aliens.
Well, that's interesting because I noticed this. So, I mean, the main thing is it's about this kid named Ataru. He's got this girlfriend, Shinobu, and in panel 1 of page 1, it's her slapping him in the face for looking at other girls. Yeah. I mean, that's the first thing you see when you open it up. And but then this alien shows up, and he has to have this contest with her, and through some confusion, he proposes to her, or she thinks he's proposing to her, but he's really thinking about marrying Shinobu. And so then she ends up she wants to be married to him, she wants to live with him, all this sort of stuff. So you think the series, and anytime you think of Urusei Yatsura, what comes up in your mind is the alien Lum, the alien girl. You think of Lum, or you think of Ataru and all that kind of stuff. But chapter 2, she's not in it. Yeah. It's got some little goblin creature that comes out of the mirror. I was like, whoa, this is a real outlier, weird chapter 2. It's almost like she changed gears, and I didn't know that she had only planned 5, but it's very obvious if you look at that.
Yeah, but then for some reason in chapter 3 she decided to bring Lum back. I don't know if it was popular demand or what, but
that's usually the way it works in the manga magazines. It's usually letters to the editor, and they're like, bring this person back or whatever. And, yeah.
And so Wikipedia said that initially, like the first year or so, it wasn't even in every issue of Weekly Shonen Sunday. It was kind of irregular. So there would have been time then for there to be letters saying, hey, what happened to Lum? Bring her back. And so in the very next chapter, she's back. I don't know that that's what happened, but it could have.
Right.
So, yeah, I hadn't quite caught Ataru. His family name is Moroboshi, and it refers to being hit by a falling star.
Oh, okay.
Ataru hit.
Yeah.
And, so he's, got aliens always landing on or near him.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little about that, too, because one of the things I loved about this series, so, as I said, it's kind of a sitcom. It actually reminded me a lot of Archie comics, because there's kind of all these love triangles or rectangles going around, with this person likes this person, that like, and she keeps introducing new characters, and that person is another point in this star that's forming of all these interrelationships. But it's very much like he seems to, so he doesn't want Lum in his life. He's trying to get rid of her. He wants Shinobu. Shinobu is a kind of long-suffering. He's always looking at other girls, and every time Lum comes on to him, she thinks he's into that, and sometimes he is for whatever reason. And but then this guy shows up at so it's never quite one or the other. It's almost like Betty and Veronica. There's one chapter, very interesting chapter, where at the end Lum is disguised as a human, and the final panel is him and her holding hands, a silent panel. And it's like, oh, there's actually some kind of progress happening here. But this character Mendo shows up, and he's like this rich status kid, and he transfers to the school. And then Shinobu she's totally in love with him. And he's kind of like a Reggie character. He's kind of in that almost the same kind of position where, and they even say that basically seem very different on the outside, but Ataru and Mendo are basically the same kind of womanizers, slanderers on the inside. That they were both always like skirt chasing or whatever. But I was amazed. To me, one of the amazing things about it was how she's constantly able to introduce a character. Like so Ataru keeps meeting these beautiful women, and he loves all of them except for Lum. For some reason, he's like head over heels for every one of them. But then they always end up having some boyfriend or something that shows up in a later chapter as well. Like there's this priestess Sakura, and he's like, oh, there's this beautiful priestess Sakura. But then several chapters after she's introduced, her boyfriend shows up. And it just keeps piling on like that. Just never...
Well, that sounds a lot like my life, but anyway. Especially in like school.
Right.
Junior high and high school, that was always the way.
Right. So yeah, there's always, she just finds a way to build like comedic situations around every character that she's introduced. It's really, my favorite was Ray, which is Lum. After several chapters of Lum, we discover that Lum has this fiance named Ray, who like turns into this big bull when he's angry. It's a bit like Ranma 1/2 actually, because he keeps changing, and there's a bit of that with some other characters too. But when he turns human, he's super handsome, and even Ataru's mom falls for him. And then Ataru's dad is like a super depressed because his mother has fallen for this younger guy, and it was really funny. The women are just as bad as the men in this. In it throughout, like whenever a handsome guy shows up, they get away with anything. And I think it was Ray. Who was the one? I think it was him. So for some reason they were trying to goad him into proposing to Lum. And he's very bad with words. Like he's just good looking. And he comes up with this proposal line, and the line is, "Will you cook my dinners forever and ever?" And he's trying to deliver this line to Lum. She's running away, and he ends up stumbling over other women all over town and delivering the line, "Will you make my dinners forever and ever?" And they love it. They totally love it. And then we cut to the scene of Ataru's mother at home, and she says, every day it's nothing but housework. She's cooking. She says, every day it's nothing but housework. What an empty existence. And then, of course, he bangs in there. He crashes in and he delivers the line, "Will you cook my dinners forever and ever?" And she's like head over heels. And she's actually considering it, like, how could I leave my husband and marry Ray?
The next time we see her, she's wearing makeup. That was, to me, like the funniest thing in the story.
Put on all this makeup. And there's a line where she says something like, Ataru says, "What are you doing, mother?" And she says something like, "Oh, this old bird still has some tricks," or something like that.
Now, I read, like I said, these 3 volumes, and for the first part of it, they're all pretty much self-contained stories, and sometimes at the ending, I kind of wished that she would pick up from that point, but it was just kind of, it's craziness, and then it ends, and then we're back to the status quo.
Right.
Where in the 3rd volume, it changed somewhat, and she starts actually continuing stories. Okay,
so I only read 1 and 2, so tell me a bit about 3. But I do have one. Before you tell me, I have a question, because there's a character who shows up in volume 1, I think, named Benten, and she's an alien, and they're in this... He ends up on Lum's world for some festival, spring festival maybe, and he has to participate in this tournament, and he falls for this beautiful alien named Benten, and she does not show up again in the first 2 volumes, whereas most other characters do. So did she happen to show up in 3?
No, she didn't.
Okay. I wonder if she ever returns.
Yeah, I don't know. I was a little surprised that she never showed up again. And Takahashi drew some really cute girls. Yeah. All these young women who Ataru's falling for are really cute. And dressed surprisingly sexily for what's ostensibly a kid's comic in 1978. I was like, really?
I would say it's because Lum's always in that bikini. I think Takahashi knew how to draw what people wanted, and male and female. I think that when she draws handsome dudes all the same way, and the pretty girls are all pretty much drawn the same way. But I was gonna say it's almost not sexy. It's almost like cheeky, I guess I would say. It's very playful. It's not really salacious.
Well, yeah, it's kind of. It reminded me a little of Three's Company, where everybody thinks there's sex going on, but there isn't.
Yeah, but not even. Yes, but that was. I think Three's Company tried to be. I would say that was like trying to be a sexy show or a racy show more than this kids comic.
Of course, Three's Company is people in their mid-20s, and this is high school students, so it's a little bit different. But
yeah, I mean, there's a scene right in the first chapter. He ends up stealing Lum's bra, her bikini top, and later when she comes back to get it, he's wearing it. And he pulls it out of his shirt to give her, and she's like, "You were wearing it?" But it was so. There was something vaguely innocent about it. Now I think there's stuff in here that it wouldn't fly. I mean, it's almost there's a lot of stuff that would be considered sexual harassment, sexual assault. There's a thing where he does with his yo-yo. There's a chapter where he's doing all these yo-yo tricks, and one of them is he flings it and whips up girls' skirts. And there's no way that would fly now. But it's still somehow the whole vibe of it is so innocent. I feel like it's just fun. Yeah. Anyway, I don't know where I was going now.
Well, so you mentioned she keeps bringing in all these characters, and just as I had kind of suspected, Wikipedia quotes Takahashi as saying that when she ran out of ideas, she would bring in new characters.
Every chapter, almost. Every other chapter?
Yeah, just about. Well, in the third volume, I felt like by the third volume, it was sort of kind of wandering from what I wanted it to be, or what it had started out as. Okay. For one thing, that's when Lum, rather than just sort of tailing Ataru everywhere he goes, she actually enrolls in his high school.
Okay.
And now she's walking around in a school uniform instead of her zebra-striped bikini.
Okay.
And there are some like ninja characters, especially some female ninja characters who start to show up a lot in the third volume. Huh. And I was like, what? And Shinobu pretty much disappears. And,
oh, really?
Ataru isn't really... It starts to feel like just Ataru and Lum are friends. Okay. For the most part. Maybe she still calls him darling. Okay. But, it's kind of... The topics of the stories are a bit different. Like like Takahashi must have kind of gotten tired of the love triangles, and Ataru is still kind of lecherous and like falling for every cute girl he sees, but that's not as much the focus as it was in the first two.
Right. It's kind of... It's interesting you should say that she... Another interesting thing I found about some of those early chapters was that sometimes what the story begins as is not anything like what it ends as. Like, it changes in the middle. Like, there's this one that I absolutely loved where they're on a school field trip, and four of them, Ataru, Mendo, Shinobu, and Lum, go into this cave. And they get lost in the cave. And they almost deliberately get lost because... Ataru wants to make out with Shinobu. Mendo wants to make out with Lum. But, of course, those girls want vice versa. Yeah. And they get lost in the dark, and then Mendo ends up making out with Ataru. And then they're like, what, when the lights finally come on. But anyway, so all this kind of funny hijinks is happening. And then suddenly they're like, okay, we've run out of food. We're down in this cave, and they find this tin can. They follow it, and there's this alien who's like who has died trapped in the cave and has this large collection of tinned food that they can eat from before they manage to escape, etc. But it really, like, it didn't start out as this thing about an alien in a cave. It started as them getting lost on this school field trip. And I was another thing I really loved about it creatively. It was very unpredictable. And it's one of those comedy series where, like, the last page of a story that might not be resolved. Like, they might have accidentally summoned 10,000 demons or something, and it's, like, the end. It's that kind of sitcom, not where they've tied up all the loose ends and everything. So I did really like how unpredictable it was. But, like I said, with that one, there's that one story where in the last panel they're holding hands. There's another story where they go into the future and they don't... Lum and Ataru don't see it, but it turns out that Ataru had married Shinobu. So there were tiny hints of a plot starting to creep in at the edges, like a larger permanent changes to things. But it sounds like from what you've described of Volume 3, it's almost happened too much too quickly, maybe?
More discussion of Urusei Yatsura coming up. Thanks to our supporters on Patreon, another set of classic early episodes of Deconstructing Comics have been unlocked, and thanks to Gabe, whose donation helped us reach this goal. And I'm putting them back up on the site in reverse order. This week I'll republish number 45 from October 16th, 2006, in which Brandon and I discuss 99 Ways to Tell a Story by Matt Madden, and my character sketches for some characters I was adding to my comic strip Spider Hag. Find the classic episodes on our Facebook and Twitter feeds by choosing the earliest months listed in the sidebar pull-down menu at deconstructingcomics.com, in publicly available posts on our Patreon page, or in the Patreon smartphone app. Classic episodes have been unlocked back to number 31, so only 14 more classic episodes will be re-released unless we meet our next Patreon goal, unlocking 15 more classic episodes, and putting our Fullmetal Alchemist podcast, The Law of Equivalent Exchange, in its own feed and on a more frequent release schedule. Check out all our goals and help us reach them at patreon.com/deconcomics.
Sawate. My name is Stella, and I am the host of Backrow to Oracle, the Barbara Gordon podcast. Backrow to Oracle is a podcast dedicated to Barbara Gordon, the first woman to hold the mantle of Batgirl for an extended period of time, roughly 1967 to 1988. The goal of Backrow to Oracle is to examine the character's history from her first appearance as Batgirl and continuing through her tenure as Oracle. Each episode looks at a vintage issue of Detective Comics or Batman, as well as other books like Justice League and Freedom Fighters, and modern issues of Batgirl and Birds of Prey. I also keep track of news involving Batgirl and other members of the Bat family, and I have a revolving series of segments like Babs in the Tube, which highlights appearances of Babs in TV and film, Shipper Spotlight, which looks at a variety of comic and pop culture couples, gives their history, and determines whether they are hot or not, Reading with Stella, which could be described as an audio drama, or just me reading a book that relates to Babs or doesn't, and of course, the mainstay literature recommendation. I have been blessed to interview writers Scott Beatty and Chuck Dixon on their Batgirl Year 1 work, Brian Q. Miller on his Batgirl run, Dwayne Swarzynski and Christy Marks on their separate Birds of Prey work, and the creators and actors of the Batgirl Spoiled, the web series. I hope to interview more creators and actors in the future. My goal, most importantly, is to make a fun, entertaining, and thoughtful show that people enjoy and from which they learn. Find the show online at thebatmanuniverse.net and iTunes, and follow the show on Facebook and Twitter at Batgirl to Oracle. Thank you, and fly on, Babs lovers.
And then the last few chapters of Volume 3, so this other girl comes who knows Lum, and she enrolls in the school, and it turns out, so she's another alien from, another Oni, and it's weird because at first it seems like she and Lum are friends, and then this girl kind of remembers that actually she hates Lum because Lum stole Ray from her.
Oh, okay.
And so Day and Lum were engaged at some point. I'm like, well, how old is she exactly? Is she a teenager or is she in her 20s?
Right.
That's a little weird. But, and so even though, she didn't get married today, Day's available as far as we know, that Day's not in the picture.
Well, Lum doesn't even like Ray. So I'm not sure what that...
And this other girl wants to get revenge on Lum by using her own power to as she's kissing someone, she can suck their youth out of them. So she's trying to trick Ataru into kissing her so she can steal his youth as a way to get revenge on Lum.
Okay.
And so the last few chapters of the volume are several different situations where this girl keeps trying to kiss Ataru and Lum keeps foiling it.
Well, that actually sounds like a typical setup from part 1 in some respect, where there's some comedic situation which forces a romantic solution, if you know what I mean. Like, for example, there's one where... so we haven't talked about Lum's power. So she can fly and she can shoot electric bolts, which she does to Ataru all the time whenever he does anything to upset her. So he tries to take away her powers, and he gets this magic ribbon from this priest named Cherry, which we haven't talked about him. He's this funny little priest dude that's always hanging around. He ties the ribbon around her and her horns, and that takes away her powers. And that kind of the situation there's the romantic situation is, now she can she needs him to protect her, and that she says that's her excuse for always staying at his side. So finally, okay, I have to get rid of this thing so she'll go away. So there's always some reason for him to hook up with some girl, like the whole thing where. So this other alien called Kurama decides, she ends up, her advisors, who are all little crow creatures, abduct Ataru to marry her. She's like, this guy's useless, but she's like, okay, I'm going to train him, so I'm going to take him back in time to meet my father, and that's Yoshitsune. But this turns into a thing where, because Yoshitsune has never met women or had known anything had any interaction with them really, Ataru decides he's going to teach Yoshitsune how to deal with women. So he's going around the streets with him, trying to pick up girls. What's his line? You want to hang out or something like that? Hey babe, you want to hang out? That's his line he delivers to every girl. So it's always whatever if it's a time travel story, it's some way to get that those kind of cheeky jokes in there in some way. So I think that whole thing about Lum's friend showing up and needing to kiss him to drain his life I think it sounds like a good setup.
Yeah, and how it might have been resolved, I don't know, because I didn't read volume 4.
Right. How many volumes were there? Does that say that on the wiki?
Boy, that's a good question.
Oh, you said 9 years though, right? So.
Well, yeah. So in the original Japanese series, yeah. Okay. 34.
Whoa. Okay.
So that means with 2 and 1, these will be 17. Yeah. So could do several more episodes of the podcast.
Yeah. Well, I wrote down a list of all the characters that major characters that showed up, and it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 15 in the first 2 volumes. So alone. Although some of them only showed up once, but they seemed to show up as major characters in those chapters. Mm-hmm. Like Sakura's boyfriend, he shows up for 1 chapter. And they've all got little... I don't know about in volume 3, but in the first 2 volumes she's quite consistent. Shinobu throws desks. That's her thing. When she gets angry, she picks up desks and throws them. And that's consistent, much like Lum's electric shocks. Or I love the way Ataru's parents are both regret having him as a son, because he just brings so much shame on their household. It's constantly how can we get rid of him?
Right. Well, that's a strong theme of like the first volume, maybe into the second, of like, people are always, talking about him. The neighbors are like, oh, is that Moroboshi boy? He's so terrible.
Yeah.
And the parents are all embarrassed. That kind of is faded by volume 3.
Okay.
But yeah, I guess Takahashi seemed to be aware that she didn't want to run things into the ground, so she had to move on to other gags, maybe.
Right. I do think some of the plots are kind of familiar, like the one where Ataru splits into two people, one kind of studious and hard-working type, and one's kind of like the bad side, and there's another story with like a 4D camera, they call it, when it takes pictures and then it transports it traps him in some other world in the picture, and it kind of, that's some of the plots
I
are a
didn't
little
even
bit...
understand how that's supposed to work.
Oh no, some of the plots were like, what's going on? Like there's one where these aliens, more different aliens come down, and they're kind of they're a bickering couple. One's like a drunk all the time, and one's the wife, and they possess Ataru, and they possess someone else, and Ataru's walking through the street getting in all sorts of trouble because he's possessed by this drunk alien. And at one stage, this woman says, we have 4 kids, don't you remember? And he's like, I don't remember. And I was like, wait a second, who's possessed by who in this scene, and why would she think that? It didn't seem to... I think that plots are so chaotic and fast-paced that sometimes maybe you're supposed to gloss over these things, or... sometimes they don't quite add up, like the one with the cameras, but I'm sure there were a couple of others like that too, where it's like, oh, I've kind of seen these stories in other manga before, but it's kind of I guess it's the same of TV sitcoms as well, where they kind of recycled plots that you've seen in other sitcoms. But I do think, we haven't even talked about the art. Like, I mean, it's so... There's such an easy flow to the artwork, even at this very early stage in her career. There are a few panels that are very reminiscent of Tezuka, but otherwise it's like really easy to look at, cartoony, very flowing. The pages just flow. It was really delightful to read in that respect.
It's interesting to me how Takahashi's work always seems to have some of the same themes.
Yeah.
Like there were, like I said, ninja in volume 3, and this kind of like old Japan, which Inuyasha was the best example of that, and
shape changing
spirits, and shape changing, and what was it called? Dean. I didn't finish that one. That came after Inuyasha.
Oh, it's Rinne, or is that
Rinne, yeah.
Yeah.
Which had to do with the afterlife and stuff like that. The cover of the 3rd volume is kind of Chinese martial arts themed, which reminded me of Namma.
Right.
The clothes are kind of the same. And there's always a lot of kind of traditional Japanese stuff mixed in. The Oni in this case. And so she seems to draw on Japanese folklore a lot in, I think, maybe all of them. But the sexy aspect kind of faded as she got older. Because you got it in this, and you've got it in Namma, but... in Inuyasha, I don't remember much of that, and it seemed to be non-existent in Ninne.
No. Ranma had it because there was the gender swapping stuff going on too, so there was always an opportunity for gags there. I think she really hit the sweet spot, the perfect concept for having those kind of gags in it. I think. And were there any other episodes that stood out to you?
Boy, I don't know. As we started talking here, I realized I can hardly remember any of them.
I kind of felt that way too. I went through them twice, and I mean, it's hard to talk about. Like, it would be like if we watched 20 episodes of Three's Company and tried to do a podcast about it, because it really is like it is, or even trying to do it about Archie comics. It's really difficult to.
Well, and I've been reading this over the past like 6-8 weeks, so that's another thing.
Right.
And I didn't have a chance to reread it.
Right. Well, there was one with a vending machine baby. So this alien baby shows up at school.
I
and
happen to be looking at that one right now.
It shows up in Mendo's locker, and he's like, "Oh no, I can't let people think that I've had this baby, that I'm some sort of womanizer." So he's trying to hide it. It turns out to be an alien that came to Earth in this vending machine, and they need to put coins in the vending machine to power it up, like 100 yen coins, which is why the baby came to the rich guy in school, Mendo. But I thought there was some super funny stuff in there, like he orders his family, his family's people, the servants, to bring him some diapers. But his whole thing is he always parachutes into school out of this plane. He jumps out of a plane and that's how he comes to school every day. And this plane shows up, or helicopters or something, with these diapers. It must have been a plane.
Yeah,
and
it's
they
like
drop
a fighter
them off.
jet.
Right, a fighter jet. And then they do this skywriting which says, "Here are the diapers you wanted." And he's been trying to keep this whole thing quiet. It was super funny. I really love that one. There's a one with a kind of voodoo doll, which I really loved, because it was one of those ones where it really switched from beginning to end, because it starts out as a voodoo doll story, but the whole punchline is about this kind of peeping Tom thing where he accidentally peeps on Shinobu, and they don't know who did it, and her family's freaking out because it happened. And the one in the cave, I really like that one too.
Mm-hmm. The only thing I remember is what I didn't like, which for some reason I did not like Cherry. I didn't like that character. I think he reminded me of something else from a completely different comic, but just kind of this, mischievous old guy character. It's like, I don't need this. and Takahashi seemed to kind of get tired of him too, because he disappears after a while.
He kind of disappears, but there's interesting in these volumes, they have these nice little sections at the end of each original volume with a whole bunch of background of the story, like the characters, and it kind of describes a whole arc through 18 volumes or whatever. And I think there's more Cherry coming up, because he gets a little write-up on his character, and it's there's still references to stuff he's doing in like volume 14 or something like that. So
oh yeah, here it is, in the back of volume 2.
Okay.
It talks about him being in volume 12, chapter 14, The Great Escape in Hullabaloo. And he does pop up once, I think, in volume 2 or 3. So he's not completely gone, but mostly absent.
So you didn't like him because he reminded you of something else?
I think that's why. I don't know. I just found the character unappealing for some reason.
Right. Okay. I did think he was funny at the start when he shows up and he says he's talking about Ataru having a kind of his face being like an ill-omened face or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I disliked any characters, because like I said, I think they popped in and they were there to create situations that she could bounce jokes off of.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if there's anything that... I think the Yoshitsune chapter was... Yeah, that was the one that I felt like it was very culturally specific. So I wouldn't say I disliked it, but I'd say the one I got the least out of, maybe. Oh yeah, but I don't know, did I make the point that I liked it that it's not really, despite it being like a sitcom, it's not a secret that these aliens are in town. Like, everybody knows about it, and it's annoying to the town folk that these aliens are constantly interfering in their lives and stuff like that. It's not like Alf or something where they're trying to hide the fact that they're aliens.
Thank goodness for that.
Yeah.
I hate that kind of story where everybody's trying to keep a secret episode after episode and nothing changes.
Yeah.
Here's the 4D camera story. Like, so yeah, the place where Ataru ends up is this desert, and then when Lum breaks the school window, on the broken area, they can see the desert out the window, even though through the other windows they just see the buildings that are there. That was just weird.
Right. So they take his picture a bunch of times, and then they develop the photos, and he's not in the photos that he had been sitting in.
Mm-hmm.
And then they see is there a photo of a desert? And then they look at the window, and the window outside is the desert, and he's out there. And to rescue him, they take another picture, or
well, so yeah, there is a picture of a desert. So out the window in the photo, they can see the desert.
Okay.
And they can see a tiny figure out on a dune. So then Lum walks over and breaks the window, and then they can see the desert straight out there. And of course, Atadu has met a beautiful girl out in the desert.
Yeah.
And he's riding with her on her camel, and she brings him up to the window that's just kind of floating there in the desert. With Lum and a couple of the high school boys talking to him. And then, they take another picture of him, and then he ends up on a raft out in the ocean in the last panel.
Right. Yeah, so how did he end up in the raft? And they weren't even trying to take a picture of him at the end. They were trying to take... The photography student was trying to take a picture of Mendo.
Yeah, he was just testing it. He says, let's test it a bit further. Here, you be the model. He points it at Atadu. Stop, you idiot. And then one of the other guys says, hit the shutter, bro.
Right.
I kinda get it and kinda not. So Atadu got sent into another world again? Let's develop the new photo. And then that's where they see him on the raft.
Right. Huh, okay. Yeah, no, it doesn't... I actually looked at that story a couple of times, and I couldn't figure out why he ended up in a second other world when Mendo was the one getting his photo taken. Anyway. Just... it was a family heirloom. Is that what the camera was? So we don't really know.
Yeah, I think so. And I'm not sure why it's 4D either, but...
Yeah. There's a gag that I think didn't get explained, which is in Volume 2, about halfway through page 108. I think it was page 108. It's the first chapter with... Is it the first chapter with Mendo? No, it can't be. But for some reason, the teacher is at school wearing onsen pajamas. And I don't think it's ever explained. Is it in Volume 2? Maybe it's in... Yeah, it is in Volume 2. It's earlier than page 108. It's like page 104... or 103, this teacher maybe he just woke up in the morning. I don't know. Oh yeah, it is the first Mendo chapter, and he's wearing onsen pajamas. And it's never discussed. He continues teaching his school day with these pajamas on. And I thought it was really kooky.
But yeah, that is maybe one of the first Moroboshi, because it starts with him parachuting from the plane.
Yeah, I think maybe that.
Did
he really only come in at Volume 2? It's strange. He feels like he was there pretty early on, but maybe... Oh, no, it is. Yeah, it is the first one that he appears in, yeah. I did feel like he was a great addition. Was he in Volume 3, or is he kind of ignored?
He might have been walking around in the background. Sakura shows up again.
Okay.
But, I know it's kind of dominated by new characters. I think that's Moroboshi. I see him here. Yeah, so, yeah, that's right. This guy, one guy who comes in is a friend of his, who dresses like Inuyasha.
Okay.
I don't quite remember why he dresses that way. I'm not sure what else we have to say about this series.
Well, I will say, like I said, it's very hard to talk about a sitcom. I think I actually thought it was really funny, and I mean, 3 of the 4 last episodes I've done of this show have been Providence, Kent State, and Drifting Classroom, and those were all perfect 10 comics, but they were so full on that reading this very lighthearted, goofball, racy comedy was super fun. And I think it was genuinely really funny comic. And there was one panel somewhere in volume 1 where there's an actual flop take where somebody says something stupid and then you just see the feet of the other characters fly up the side
there
of the
are
panel.
a lot of panels where when somebody says something and people react to it just by like throwing themselves on the floor.
Yes.
With their arms stretched out, in front of them, just like slam face first on the floor.
That is, to me, that's perfect comics. So I absolutely love that too. Yeah.
Yeah, so we can recommend it for that alone.
Okay.
Urusei Yatsura is published by Viz. Want to support this podcast? You can help us out by joining us on Patreon at patreon.com/deconcomics, and go to deconstructingcomics.com to connect to us on Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube, to shop on Amazon to support the show, and to find links to subscribe to the podcast. Our theme is by J.B. Anderton. If you're looking for some constructive feedback on your comic, send it to us and Mulele and I will critique it on our spin-off podcast, Critiquing Comics. Send it to mail@deconstructingcomics.com. We'll read at least 30 pages of it and critique it on the show. This Saturday, a new edition of Critiquing Comics. Then next Wednesday, The Law of Equivalent Exchange. Patrick and I discuss Chapter 3 of the manga Fullmetal Alchemist, The Mining Town. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.